Welcome back to Fossil versus Future. I'm Daisy.
And I'm James.
And today we're going to talk about...
cities.
What about cities? Cities cover less than 3% of the Earth's land surface. Yet today, more than half the world's population, over 4 billion people, live in them. By 2050, that figure is expected to rise to nearly 7 in 10. Cities are engines of opportunity and growth, generating over 80% of global GDP. But this economic power comes at a cost. Urban areas are responsible for more than 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions, driven mainly by transport and buildings. They also consume over 3/4 of the planet's natural resources and produce vast amounts of waste and pollution. At the same time, cities are on the front lines of climate change. Their dense concentrations of people and infrastructure make them highly vulnerable to floods, heat waves, and rising sea levels. Since 1985, over 75,000 kilometres squared of new urban land, equivalent to about 50 times the area of Greater London, has been developed in areas prone to severe flooding. And these impacts are not evenly felt. Poorer communities are often the most exposed and the least equipped to recover. However, cities are also where some of the most powerful climate solutions are emerging. Concentrating people, ideas, and investment creates opportunities to increase resource efficiency and decarbonize at scale. Cities are the perfect testing ground to refine and scale up climate solutions. How we design, construct, manage, and power our cities will lock in patterns of behavior, lifestyles, and emissions for generations. But lowering urban emissions can also improve well-being, create fairer communities, and strengthen resilience. Cities are central to implementing our global climate goals. They have the power to turn global targets into local action.
Indeed they do. And it's one of those areas where we could just talk about cities and pull in many of the other themes.
Definitely.
In our conversations. There's something about the organizational size of a city. So politically, the size can be big enough to be material and small enough to be effective if you make decisions. There's a link to our conversation about democracy too, because you get sometimes a more immediate political feedback if you're the mayor of a city or the local government decides to act and do something about climate change. You learn quite quickly from that electorate whether it's a good or a bad decision politically. And then, yes, there are loads of design solutions which are attractive. How to live better solving the problem is another theme we keep coming around to.
Mm-hmm.
And there are good connections with other environmental themes like air pollution, obviously. If you reduce air pollution in a city, the chances are you've done a few things that are sensible to deal with climate change, right? And we'll come back to some of those real world examples, places that we are familiar with, we live in, or know about, where tackling air pollution at a city level has a material effect on a country's capacity to deal with climate change. And then there are all the kind of surfaces arguments. I'm involved with this Smart Surfaces Coalition in the States. It's quite a good way of thinking about cities and climate by just imagining you're looking down on a city and look at the surfaces. Are they the surfaces that you would want them to be to deal with climate change? Do they reflect radiation away? Do they absorb radiation and turn it into power? Can they cope with the kind of rainfall we now get? Can they manage the water flow? Most of our surfaces, let's face it, are dark. They're not
These
porous.
urban heat islands are a huge problem. Cities are going to warm so much faster than other areas as a result of using things like cement and concrete and having that sort of dense population using energy. Cities are getting really hot.
Cities are, and extreme heat has a real consequence. Just like you were mentioning, the actually fairly crazy numbers about where cities are being built on floodplains, where they obviously increase risk. But the same is true, the same arguments are present in extreme heat. And the inequalities are very visible when it comes to extreme heat. You see the difference on a summer's day between an area that is relatively wealthy with more green space. It will be cooler than an area where there's large amounts of public housing and concrete surfaces and little green space. Those areas are going to be significantly hotter on a hot day. And there are consequences from that. There are everything from worker productivity through to levels of violence and conflict. And we do have to think about how cityscapes are redesigned to make them more resilient to extreme heat. But on the whole, if you do make decisions at city level to deal with that problem, the chances are you'll create a more attractive space for people to live in. Greener space, a space that has more capacity to manage these other elements like heat and rain. That when that work's done, the people who live there will appreciate it. They may not necessarily acknowledge it in their vote, who knows, but they'll experience an improvement in the quality of their lives if those decisions are made and those design solutions are implemented.
Yeah. And in terms of making decisions at the city level, I mean, obviously for climate change, we have global goals, we have country level commitments, but then at the city level, does it tend to just be that cities can do better than the national level? They can implement policies at the city level, or mayors can drive change at the city level as long as it is better than what the country is committed to?
I think there's a chance that good leadership at city level can drive the implementation of some of these big goals better than a national politician. I mean, it's partly to do with control over resources. It doesn't work I'm just thinking also of years of working here in London on the Sustainable Development Commission, advising mayors of very different types and very different people, different parties. But the effort of the Sustainable Development Commission in London was directed towards getting stuff done despite the limitations of our system of governance, because London does have an authority that governs the whole space, but it's also broken up into the boroughs, and there's a long-standing, what do you call it, a sort of rivalry between the city and the state. The central government periodically fights battles of authority and control with the London administration, and it gets in the way of getting stuff done. But despite that, on the whole, some progress has been made in London, and it is experienced and felt, again, particularly with reduction in air pollution. Some of those initiatives have been quite fiercely resisted. Certainly anything to do with transport is always resisted. Anything to do with controlling the usage of cars is always resisted. But I would like to think that people do acknowledge, or should acknowledge, that the air is better now than it was in the last. I mean, we've got the numbers to prove that, haven't we?
Did you? Sadiq Khan posted on LinkedIn, I think it was just this week, about the fact that they estimated that it was going to take 193 years for London to meet legal air pollution limits, and we've done it in just 9 years as a result of the ultra low emission zone, which I think is the world's largest clean air zone. But like you say, it has faced a fair amount of backlash.
It's always challenged, because it feels as if something's being taken away, some freedom is being taken away, and that's always resisted. And you have to have very good reason for taking away any freedom that's been established and accepted and taken for granted. But I think air pollution is a classic example of a public good, that if you have the political courage to go after that objective, and you choose instruments that work, and they don't always, let's face it, but controlling the flow of traffic and limiting the use of certain vehicles, we know makes a difference. I mean, it's not just cars, isn't it? It's all sorts of other generators of one kind or another. An awful lot of the pollution in London was associated with this construction industry and the various diesel units about the place. And obviously, electrification helps enormously. Any city that is seriously planning to switch various transportation means over to electric is going to get a benefit in air pollution stats, obviously. But that requires some foresight, some planning, and some organization, and some choosing which route to get higher penetration of electric vehicles is obviously a political choice, but it's also now an organizational choice. You've got to plan. You've got to encourage the investors and the developers of projects to get to work to deliver the outcome.
Yeah, and you need all the infrastructure that's required alongside encouraging electric vehicles, so charging units, things like that.
And also reimagining what buildings can do as infrastructure, because we're used to separating housing, say, from transport. Well, the technologies we have today encourage you to think how they're connected. Any building anywhere can be, with the right technology and the right design, a generator of power, can store power, can deliver power into an electric vehicle, which also can store power and can return it for use. So that's a whole new system that we haven't had before, but is available now, but it needs to be designed in ways that are not just for an individual consumer that happens to have the money to put those parts together, but in a way that benefits all those people who now live in cities. And some of that can be done with charging that takes place, within a building. But a lot of the responses to the technology opportunities that exist now are more got to think very carefully about space. It's not easy to imagine a city completely running on electric power. You've got to really think about the design. And one of the technologies that we know works, particularly in using space sensibly, is battery swapping. So, whether it's a last mile delivery vehicle or a bus, probably those two ends of the spectrum best suited to battery swapping rather than personal vehicles. Well, in those circumstances, again, you need to think where are they going to be? How easy are they to access? If you can deploy lots of these battery swapping stations, you'll be able to make better use of the limitations on physical space.
And the fact that cities do have that concentration, things are close together, you're able to implement these kind of solutions. You wouldn't have to hopefully travel far to swap your battery because everything's
because it's more
closer
available
together.
And the early examples we've seen prove that. So we look at the battery swapping enterprises in India. They tend to be around train stations or existing fuel stations, forecourts.
Okay,
Right?
so an old sort of petrol pump becomes
Exactly. So you can put a kiosk with small batteries in it for bikes and rickshaws, and you can put that on the same piece of real estate that you previously put a petrol pump.
Yeah. This is something I think we chatted with Clover Hogan about, but there is also an argument of why do you need an electric car in a city at all, and why are we not cycling or walking or using public transport and actually having more car-free zones in cities? And I think Oxford Circus, Oxford Street is one area of London that is hopefully at some stage going to be pedestrianised. And there are people think it's, going to be a huge issue for businesses, but actually it tends to do the opposite. And because these areas, these shopping areas become pedestrianised, they encourage people to spend time there and to shop there because it's just a nicer experience.
But that's another one that's created quite extraordinary levels of adverse reaction. Again, I think because of a sense of things being taken away. But you're absolutely right. That a city where there's more scope for walking or cycling is likely to bring people together for a variety of enterprises, including, of course, shopping.
Yeah.
But we've got accustomed to being in our little metal boxes, quite separated. And there's no doubt that all cities that take seriously dealing with these big environmental themes have also a sense that getting public transport to be not just useful but attractive helps reduce the use of personal
Yeah.
vehicles. I know that's so
And
obvious.
safe as well,
Yeah,
that women and more vulnerable people feel safe on public transport at all times of day, things like
yeah,
that.
yeah. There's another factor too, especially in cities that have ancient buildings or have a kind of cultural history in the urban environment that they wish to look after and protect. Electric vehicles cause less vibration than a diesel vehicle, for example, and that there's a different feeling on the street when there are lots of electric vehicles around them. It's not just the exhausts that are coming out or the lack of them, but it's also the vibration. We all know
Mm.
if you're walking along a pavement in a street that's packed with cars, often going nowhere, you can feel the
Well, I
vibration
guess the noise
and the
pollution
noise
as well.
pollution. Exactly. So
Mm.
those are positive attributes in the change. But you're right. Urban design increasingly has to think about how can we get all of the functions of a city to work well without people moving themselves in their own personal vehicle. And there's a lot of interesting design solutions out there, and often a lot of them are very ancient. Certainly, any city that experiences really extreme heat can go back and look at early urban design and think, oh, that's quite clever how they made those streets
Yeah.
shady.
Yeah.
How did you? And of course, you walked around those streets, and you had buildings that in a take an example of an obvious one from Greece. Look at the white buildings. Look at the shaded streets. They're curved. They're not made for motor vehicles. They're made for people to walk around and be protected from the sun when they go about their business. And look at all those designs in particularly, I think of both Japanese and Arab architecture where water is central to the shared space, and trees and plants are used to cool. As you know, I grew up in Lebanon and Singapore. Both those cultures had strong appreciation of the value of plants and trees and water in their urban design. And even and maybe particularly in the case of Singapore, when Lee Kuan Yew was the very, you know, powerful, sort of almost benevolent dictator character that really drove the development of Singapore. He wanted to make Singapore a garden city. So every development came with the
Mm.
planters. There were trees and shrubs and flowers planted everywhere, but it was designed also to create an environment that people felt happy to be in whilst it was being developed very rapidly.
Yeah, it just makes you feel good, doesn't it, being
Yeah,
surrounded by nature? I
yeah,
saw an example of using a surface for good, bee bus stops.
yeah,
Apparently beginning to sort of put
yeah,
beehives on the top of
yeah.
bus stops. And um, London, I mean, is the world's first national park
It
city, I
is.
think. We've got
Yeah,
50% green and blue space in London,
yeah.
which is, yeah, really lovely to have.
I've always loved the Crown Estate, which is remarkable, extraordinary that such an institution still exists. But the Crown Estate has, you know, really good long-term sustainability policies, which they can put into place because they have a very substantial property portfolio and they have a lot of authority to implement their ideas. And I've always loved their pollination pathways. So they
Oh, I
know,
haven't seen
yeah,
those.
they know where they've got buildings. I mean, classic example would be Regent Street here in London, and this has been in place for quite some time. So they know, for example, how to connect the parks via their roofs. So
Oh,
you'll
okay.
find that there's a green space on this roof and that roof, and a pollinator can move between them, so they can actually travel between one park and another via the rooftops of their
Ah,
buildings. And it could be because it's just a green roof, or it could actually be a garden. It could be a vegetable garden. It could be it could have a beehive on it. But in any event, it's been thought through. Again, looking down at the surfaces, saying, all right, well, we've got these buildings
mm,
here. There's the park. There's another park.
yeah.
If we could create a pathway for a pollinator, that would be a good thing. And because we have a lot of garden space, private as well as public,
Mm.
we actually have quite a thriving bee population in London. In fact, I've even heard people mutter complaints that we have too
Too
many.
many
Yeah, we
bees.
have too many. We have too many honeybees apparently in
Okay.
London,
Who knew?
and that's not something you would have thought of. And by comparison to some tracts of the countryside, which frankly have lower levels of biodiversity than London. Another thing that people perhaps don't register, that just because of agricultural practices, there's been a dramatic decline in pollinators.
Mm.
Whereas in London, and I don't know much about other cities, but where you've got lots of green space and lots of range of plant, private gardens with their flowers and whatever, you're going to get more pollinators.
Interesting. Yeah, I've seen in Spain they're using vines more and more across the streets as a way of providing shade. Planting trees is obviously a common solution.
Yeah.
Um,
Paris too, Anne Hidalgo in Paris, again, fought fiercely over many of the innovations and policy that she has driven through, fierce resistance in many respects. But I would argue that the the quality of life in Paris has improved for many, many people who live and visit and come into work because of those initiatives. Now, I'm sure that there have been difficulties with you know with transport in particular, and areas that have become
yeah.
pedestrianised or greened up, and that people resent. But there has been a significant shift in the way space has been used and designed to be greener in Paris. And I'd like to think that that would be, on the whole, a positive thing for most people.
They've done a lot in Paris in terms of the cycling
Yeah,
infrastructure as well, in
yeah,
increasing the number of cycle lanes and again the sort of infrastructure that comes with cycling. Like one of the reasons that a lot of people don't want to cycle is because they're nervous that their bike's going to get stolen. So then, how do you implement more boxes for
yeah.
bikes and bicycle racks and places people can store their bicycles safely?
Yeah, many of these initiatives have, they have their own difficulties with, crazy cyclists and people who think they're
Own
actually
the
a
road.
car. Yeah, exactly, and ignore all the traffic signs and, um, and all these uh, bikes that you can rent, especially the e-bikes that are really pretty fast, which is great. I mean, people zip around on them now, but they also dump them in pretty unpleasant ways on the side of pavement. So these are innovations that have to be adjusted to, that never come without complications. But I do feel like there is a kind of renaissance in urban design coming from a desire to fix these big systemic problems. And little by little, I do see, London is a classic example, isn't it? Because there's a lot of unhappiness about the state of the world at the moment, not least because of this topic. And yet, London is safer, probably than it's been in 1,000 years. I mean, it sounds like a big statement, but it's not that hard to track murder rates, levels of crime. Cities have been exciting but dangerous places for forever, right? And if you're living today in many cities, actually, they aren't hellholes. Actually, they're not. They're relatively safe compared to how they were. The air is relatively better than it was. There are all sorts of opportunities to live and work together that are attractive. Certainly, innovation in cities anywhere increases with those connections you were describing before. That's one of the great benefits of living in a city, a constant interaction with other people, fiercely trying to make it, getting on with their lives, sharing their ideas, challenging each other. Highly competitive spaces, obviously they are. So I choose to be quite optimistic and positive about city life whilst dealing with these immense challenges that come from climate.
I think something that would really help and is a problem in London is the lack of community that a lot of people feel of being in such a big city, and you don't really feel like a citizen of your city. I don't think you really feel that connection. And I think if we could build better communities within our large cities, that would help
Yeah,
people feel motivated and feel like they want to be part of improving the lives of everybody in the place where they lived.
yeah, a strong sense of belonging is
Yeah.
really important wherever you're from.
And green spaces and parks and things do help. Having community spaces where you can bring people together and they can enjoy the city rather than being at home on their own.
Yeah,
Those are important.
yeah, yeah. Social alienation and atomization may be made worse, well, probably made worse by our dependency these days on our gadgets. But yes, you can organize and design that in, by building, but better public space, by ensuring that when you have new developments, new buildings don't go up in isolation; they go up in a context, and that's why again I feel like a lot of good work is being done on urban design. Of course, you need that combination, like so many of these areas, between good political direction, good policy development, good institutional organization, finance, professional services that feed into it. There's a whole long list of combinations that you need to get right in order to build or rebuild, in many instances, a city that works for people in their interests. And obviously, you can see this more clearly with a blank space. But some of the great cities of the world have to be constantly reinvented. And one of the benefits of having a large space where a single decision could have a material effect is that you could decide with a city ordinance on, I don't know, building efficiency or the prioritization of what sort of projects that would get through a planning system. You could start to stimulate all of those responses out of the design and engineering and architecture and professional communities that you need to put together to provide the real world infrastructure and physical space for people to live and work in.
And there are organizations that are sort of working with cities. So C40 is
C40, good
probably one
organ.
of the most
Been around for
well-known.
ages, yeah.
Nearly 100 mayors
Yeah.
who are part of this organization, chaired by or co-chaired by Sadiq Khan, I believe.
Yeah,
Um,
London had a very big part in the
yeah,
origin story of C40, but there's a lot of mutual learning that takes place in that organization, and one hopes that there's an openness. Of course, there's a sense of status and priority, and size matters, and there's a lot of history associated with cities, but a lot of the best ideas are emerging from parts of that C40 network that don't have big names but have done interesting
yeah.
things.
Membership is based on performance, I think, and having to meet certain criteria, leadership principles rather than paying fees to join. So
Yeah.
that seems
And so you
positive.
get variety, and you see what people are testing out, and you can judge whether that's going to work in your political economy,
Yeah, in
or
your
whether
culture
in your culture. Could you imagine that being delivered in your place just because it's been successful in Brazil or Mexico or Sierra Leone? Just think of some real examples.
Yeah, 3 and 4 C40 cities are reducing per capita emissions faster than their respective national governments. So that shows that
Yeah,
hopefully by having this sort of leadership and this forum, you can drive change quicker than the
yeah.
country that you're a part of.
And we've talked before about the huge value of experiencing that change as a good thing, as opposed to academically evaluating the
Yeah,
stats.
like, oh, emissions have dropped. What
Yeah.
does that
Okay. What
mean?
does that mean? Did I notice that? Did I experience that? Did I experience it as opposed to those who live over there? So the more, the more that can be actually experienced, you probably still need to tell the story in a evidentiary way and not just anecdotes about how people feel. But it is a good thing if an organization like C40 can accumulate, aggregate, and communicate those narratives, those experiences from many different parts of the world, so it doesn't feel like it's only something you can do if you've got significant financial resources and you're in Europe.
Yeah. I think you saying people over there reminded me that in the next 100 years, I think none of the world's biggest cities are going to be in America, Europe, or even China. Um, they're going to
Yeah,
be in Africa and
good point.
India. And so
Yeah,
we're talking about London and Paris,
yeah.
but the
But
change is
really,
really needed
yeah,
in these countries. And there's going to have to be huge like adaptation measures in these cities. I think Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, is
it's sinking.
sinking.
Yeah,
So I think they're
it's they're going to
moving
move it. Yeah,
their
no,
capital
I
city.
know.
Um,
Shanghai
and
too.
oh,
Shanghai
really?
is, yeah. Those are, honestly, those are huge,
Yeah.
huge issues.
And in Lagos, which is already a huge city, they're already having $4 billion worth of economic losses each year due to flooding.
Flooding, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that's a city that's growing incredibly quickly.
yeah. It's a strong point, isn't it? Where is the growth going to be, and how do you manage all of those issues? Because resilience is key, and then how do you finance it? Because a lot of those places
Yeah.
that we just mentioned are going to find today, sadly, cost of capital is high, and it's more difficult to direct the investment resources that are required to build a sort of future-proof urban environment. You've got to really, really try. But all those technologies are visible now. You can imagine, if you can finance it, terrific, but you can imagine now a big city growing around electrification, for example. You can visualize that. And you now know for sure that the costs are lower than they were last year, and they'll be lower next year. Right? Certainly, with solar being the classic example.
Hmm.
But if you were able to combine renewable generation with storage, with the use of electric vehicles, you can imagine. I mean, I can remember lots of visits to the sort of places you're talking about, where crazy traffic and massive pollution. You could see that there could be solutions to those problems quite quickly with
Yeah.
electrification of transport in particular. Small vehicles, last mile delivery vehicles, rickshaws, bikes. Switching diesel out for electric will save those people running those businesses or moving their goods around town money. They'll do better economically. The air quality will improve.
Yeah.
It will be a better system.
Yeah. Traffic and congestion is really bad for time wasted and
Massive, yeah.
sat in a car and not
Yeah, I
being
know.
productive.
I know, not being productive, exactly. So, and those mega cities that will grow over period. And maybe we'll rethink some urban design. So with these technologies, the shape of cities might change. The density might change. We're going to probably grow more food in cities. Lots of vertical farming examples, are emerging.
Well, there's the city, I can't remember what it's called in Saudi Arabia, the
Neom.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, talk about a different shape. That's a big line in the desert. Amazing. And who knows whether that will work or whether it will be hubristic and fail. A lot of this imagining of the future has got practical problems to overcome, not least of which is climate itself. Access to water, for example. Huge demands for water in urbanization. How is that system going to be run? Where are we going to put the water resources to support a city like that? Especially if you denude the watersheds.
Yeah.
A lot of cities in the so-called emerging, developing, in the global south, all these words are slightly inadequate to describe what I mean, but you've really got to look to where your water's going to come from.
Mm-hmm.
And desalination is expensive, even if you use solar. It's a big effort to spend the resources to guarantee your access to clean water.
Another technology which is expensive because of the energy costs. I did an internship with a company that had air-to-water generators. So they harness the humidity in the air, and then the humidity hits cold plates and condenses, and you can get fresh drinking water. But until we have cheaper energy in place, that's not really feasible unless you have incredibly humid conditions. And in Lima, in Peru, they use these big nets to catch the fog because they don't have much rain, but they have loads of fog. So again, capturing the water within the fog as a source.
And energy and water are big limiters. You've really got to be sure that you can manage both well enough to sustain a city of any great scale. That's a big vulnerability. Talk about building resilience. That's a huge dependency. And all our chats about technology, AI and data centers and all these things that are apparently going to be part of our future, they're also limited by both. The capacity to use AI, and we also have talked about the unequal distribution of the value of that technology or set of technologies. They're all completely tied to access to energy and management of water. So, when you are imagining what these cities in Africa are going to be like, they are going to have to be designed around energy and water.
And then you have the issue of, we're talking about cities, but then rural areas that are also going to be feeling the impacts of climate change and people moving into the cities and the cities expanding and migration.
And every time there's conflict or a drought, destroying some livelihood in a rural community, what do? They move to the city. I mean, we've also had discussions about war and conflict and radicalization, and again, you can track all those connections. If you have a famine that drives people away from the land and they move to the city, we have loads of evidence that often increases the chances that they'll be radicalized by a political or religious group, and it often comes with lack of employment opportunity, young men without jobs, easily radicalized and fired up with the need to break things. And that is a sociological phenomenon that is connected to resources and access to them. So cities have always done that. They've always been a magnet for people on the move, and that's generally, on average, a good thing because they bring energy, drive, determination to succeed, ideas. But it puts a huge burden on the capacity of the city to absorb and to cope with what often brings conflict.
Yeah. So I guess we as individuals, if we're living in cities, the things that we can do are contacting mayors, voting in the in a certain way to drive climate action within our cities, those parties that are looking at implementing those changes. Um,
Yes, and cities are brilliant for forming communities,
yeah,
communities of interest. The capacity to self-organize in a city is great. You could build interest groups quite quickly. The concentration of resources, as you said at the opening, is helpful. You can get stuff done. Yeah, politics always matters. Who you vote for, whether they're an effective government, no matter what part of the political spectrum, do they do the things that communities want done? How do you connect your own individual circumstances with your local community? What is it that you could become a member of, or join, or participate in? And then there's also so much opportunity in the world of work that you're in.
mm,
Because chances are that if you're in a city and in work, there's something about your workplace that could be instrumental.
yeah. How can you change your behavior to drive change, like
Yeah.
walking, cycling,
Yeah.
recycling? That's something we haven't spoken about, the sort of waste infrastructure within
Staggering.
cities and the way that different cities deal with that so differently. We just put our bin bag on the street outside
Yeah.
side our flat because we're in a block of flats. There isn't somewhere. So from a social point of view, it's not the nicest solution,
No.
and it means that we have the rubbish is collected twice every day.
Is it?
Yeah,
That's different. Yeah, that's different. Yeah, classic
being
example
processed.
of London, right?
Yeah.
There's no unified waste collection system. There are
Mhm.
some collaborations between boroughs,
Yeah,
which is obviously a good thing. Better, more efficient use of resources, of administrative resources there. But my word, yeah, there's just that. Just how does your waste get managed is a
yeah,
big issue. Where does it go? What are the emissions? I mean, honestly, everyone's got. But you could tell there's something quite recognizably good about a city that deals with its waste well.
yeah. It
You
makes a
know?
huge difference to
Yeah.
how you feel just walking down the street. And um, in Spain and Italy, often you actually have to take the rubbish to a big bin at the end of your street rather than leaving it there to be collected at individual households, which
Yeah.
I quite like. And I think from a separation point of view, people are more aware of plastic goes in this bin, glass goes in this bin. Whereas in London, we just put it all
Yeah. You
in
have.
one bag.
Yeah. There is. Yeah. There, it depends where you are.
Pros and
Yeah. There are
cons.
different parts of it. But it's the same actually with a lot of other interventions a city government can do well or badly. Everything from how they organise transport through to building ordinances, through to uh, their procurement policies,
Yeah, procurement—it's an
or
interesting one.
or you know the difference between individual heating and district heating, and there's lots of good ideas about how one can build a better system for the city that benefits the city as a whole and doesn't leave everything to individual choices, right?
Yeah, benefits both
Yeah,
the city, the environment, and the people
yeah,
living
yeah.
there.
And then it becomes a more attractive place to live, and on the whole, that tends to increase the amount of rates that are available to pay for things. There's the attractiveness of a city is a real economic factor. Produces obviously greater resources for fixing things, but also builds communities that feel more secure and less at risk.
Yeah, we've talked about insurance as well, and the property prices, and
Yeah,
there's all those factors as
yeah,
well.
yeah. Well, that's another also connection to finance. To how do you manage the risk associated with city living, especially with floods, where we know a lot of damage gets caused. But those are quite useful indicators of how a set of solutions can be put into effect at city level cities can, not all cities, but cities on the whole can raise money and deploy money in bonds, for example, that deliver public good uh, at relatively good prices. So yes, there's a big opportunity
Opportunity.
for cities to be useful drivers of the kind of responses that we need to deal with climate change.
Agreed. Thank you so much for listening to Fossil versus Future. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and give us a rating. Follow us on social media and send us the what about questions you would like us to discuss.